mothers taken to Mars, a Terminator trying to keep his franchise alive, and a magic sci-fi board game. Can you guess which big sci-fi blockbusters lost the most money? All that and more ahead. You wouldn't normally associate comedies with massive budgets, but titles like Evan Almighty, which reportedly cost $250 million to make in 2007, show that entries in this genre can rack up budgets comparable to your average Marvel movie. The Adventures of Pluto Nash, a 2002 sci-fi comedy starring Eddie Murphy, wasn't quite that costly, but it still had a sizable $100 million budget. Up to this point in his career, Murphy hadn't appeared in a live-action movie that exceeded $317 million worldwide. That meant Pluto Nash needed to be an abnormally lucrative star vehicle to justify that enormous budget. Unfortunately, Pluto Nash came nowhere close to being profitable. Instead, it was a legendary box office flop that grossed only $7 million worldwide, including a paltry $4.4 million in North America. CBS News would later report that this title lost a gigantic $92.9 million. The dismal reviews for Pluto Nash seemed to justify that non-existent conviction in its box office prospects. Still, even the most pessimistic individuals could have never imagined that Pluto Nash would rack up box office losses largely unheard of for a comedy. High expectations were riding on the computer-animated sci-fi action film Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Specifically, the feature was seen as a potentially groundbreaking title for the domain of ultra-realistic computer-generated visuals in cinematic narratives. In an article from Animation World Network, VFX supervisor Remo Balcells provided detailed explanations for the various technological revolutions that the production provided. This included the way the film's animators rendered visuals for things like fire or explosions. While all of this was exciting for animation aficionados, a pricey tentpole can't become a box office hit by VFX breakthroughs alone. The eventual box office haul of Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within would reflect this brutally. In its worldwide box office run, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within grossed just $85.1 million, a disastrous sum given its $137 million cost. That budget was part of the problem here, as The Spirits Within was too expensive for a non-sequel animated feature. However, the financial woes of The Spirits Within were even worse than anyone could have anticipated, since it lost $94 million. Needless to say, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within did not meet those lofty pre-release expectations.
What are we going to do now?
Nothing.
Stealth was inarguably the biggest killer jet movie of the summer of 2005. It also was one of Jamie Foxx's first movies after winning an Oscar for the feature, Ray. However, Stealth ended up cratering at the box office, and even became one of the biggest box office duds of that year, grossing just $76.4 million globally on a $138 million budget. Stealth was a catastrophe at the box office. The promise of a jet gaining sentience and going on a rampage just wasn't something people were lining up to see. Part of the problem with Stealth was its massive budget. That $138 million price tag meant this film had to perform abnormally high for a blockbuster not based on any pre-existing source material to be profitable. It also didn't help that while Fox was an Oscar winner, the other two leads of the film, Jessica Biel and Josh Lucas, didn't have extensive experience anchoring big blockbusters. It's no wonder the film ended up losing a whopping $96 million for Sony Columbia Pictures. The 2015 Fantastic Four movie was supposed to relaunch this franchise in style. This was to be a grim and gritty take on the famous Marvel superhero team that could eventually spawn sequels, crossovers, and whatever else 20th Century Fox could imagine. That all changed once the box office results for this feature came in. The abysmal $167.8 million worldwide gross of this Fantastic Four was a cold splash of water in the face of all those expectations that this title could spawn a long-term franchise. While it's a terrible sum under any circumstances, this was an especially bad gross when compared to the worldwide totals of the preceding two Fantastic Four movies. The 2015 Fantastic Four came in 50% behind the global haul of the 2005 Fantastic Four installment. It wasn't what 20th Century Fox had in mind when it greenlit this reboot. To be frank, a lot was going on to make audiences wary of shelling out cash for this version of the Fantastic Four. But what really sank this one was when director Josh Trank disowned the film just hours before its August 7th release. It was a rare event that grabbed headlines and immediately gave the film a toxic reputation. Estimated to have lost somewhere between $80 and $100 million for 20th Century Fox, the ambitions of this Fantastic Four film becoming a pop culture phenomenon were quickly snuffed out.
It's clobbering time!
After the Matrix films, the duo Lana and Lily Wachowski struggled to parlay their previous financial glory into other non-Matrix sci-fi blockbusters. However, this struggle was more obvious than ever on their 2015 feature, Jupiter Ascending, which had a reported production budget of $179 million. The sizable budget was needed to cover the expansive scope of this title, as well as secure major talent in the lead roles like Mila Kunis and Channing Tatum. Unfortunately, spending all that dough didn't really end up attracting scores of moviegoers. Grossing just $181.9 million worldwide, including a dismal $47.4 million in North America, Jupiter Ascending came in way behind expectations. It eventually lost $95.7 million, a sharp contrast to the days of the Wachowski sisters printing money with their original Matrix films. The only comfort for this directorial duo here is that the film has developed a cult following, albeit not nearly a big enough following to render the feature profitable.
Up is hard, down is easy.
Thank you. Wow.
20th Century Fox's attempt to launch an animation studio in response to the wild success of The Lion King and other 1990s titles ended in a spectacular disaster with Titan AE. It was only the second project to emerge from Fox Animation Studios. Titan AE was a massive sci-fi adventure film full of explosions, aliens, and you guessed it, spaceships. Costing a pricey $75 million to make, the pressure was on the movie to make enough money to ensure that Fox Animation Studios could keep on trucking. Unfortunately, Titan AE only made $36.7 million at the worldwide box office, which included a meager $22.7 million in North America. Within mere days of the Titan AE opening, Fox Animation Studios was shut down. In total, it was so much of a flop that it cost Fox $100 million. For years, the Transformers movies were financially bulletproof. The live-action stories of robots that fight each other and turn into vehicles were reliable generators of massive box office hauls. As late as Transformers Age of Extinction in 2014, the series could still exceed $1 billion and top all other titles at that year's worldwide box office. Unfortunately, the good financial luck for this saga came to a close with Transformers: The Last Knight. The 2017 installment saw Optimus Prime going bad and the mythology of King Arthur getting swirled up in all the robot mayhem, and these fresh ingredients just weren't enough to stave off financial misery for the franchise. While many movies would be pleased as punch with a $602.8 million worldwide gross, The Last Knight made less than all prior Transformers movies. This occurred even as the movie cost anywhere from $217 to $260 million to produce, a noticeable increase from the budgets of earlier Transformers entries. With such a gargantuan budget, it would have taken far more than just $602.8 million globally to make this one profitable. Per the head of CBS Viacom, The Last Knight ended up losing in excess of $100 million plus for Paramount Pictures. Over the years, many movies with Mars in the title or in their plot haven't fared so well at the box office. This obviously isn't a concrete rule, given that movies like The Martian and the original Total Recall were major hits. However, the constant financial troubles that have plagued Mars-centric films certainly haven't done any favors to the reception of such titles. The tremendous box office failure of Mars Needs Moms did nothing to dissuade any potential jitters over the financial viability of movies set on Mars. Released in March 2011, Mars Needs Moms debuted in a month that's often been kind to animated family fare. Mars Needs Moms was a significant exception to this trend, grossing just $39.5 million globally. That was actually a disastrous sum considering its $150 million budget. Competition from other animated family movies, such as Rango or fellow Disney title Romeo and Juliet, helped keep audiences away from Mars Needs Moms. The divisive nature of the film's motion capture animation technique also didn't do it any favors. Seems like there was a lot more going on with this movie that made it lose around $100 million than just it being set on Mars. The hope with Terminator Dark Fate was to finally get the Terminator series back on track. The franchise had been dragged down by a trio of sequels that never quite resonated with the public or broke through as much as they could have financially. Dark Fate attempted to give die-hard fans exactly what they wanted, with James Cameron back for the first time since T2 Judgment Day, this time as a producer. Linda Hamilton also reprised her role as Sarah Connor. This was starkly different from the last 3 Terminator movies, that solely focused on familiar characters like John Connor. This bold attempt to revive the Terminator brand was even reflected in its massive $185 million budget. Unfortunately, all efforts didn't lure in moviegoers to the box office. Dark Fate ended up making only $250.3 million worldwide, the vast majority of which came from its international run.
My past has caught up with me.
After so many underwhelming Terminator movies, not even the return of Cameron and Hamilton could get moviegoers back on board with the series. The result of all this was not only the lowest global haul for a Terminator sequel, but also a massive $122.6 million loss. With that, this franchise was officially terminated. In Battleship, human beings managed to defeat the odds and stave off an alien invasion of the planet Earth. It's a classic underdog story, the kind that has defined so many beloved hit blockbusters. In real life, though, there was no happy ending in store for the box office run of Battleship. This film adaptation of the beloved board game was a massive flop at the worldwide box office, grossing just over $313.4 million globally, including just $65.2 million from North America. That was a less than ideal haul for a summer blockbuster under any circumstance, but it was especially disappointing considering that Battleship cost a hefty $220 million to make. The underwhelming aspects of Battleship's box office failings were endless, as were the reasons it came up short financially. Having lost a projected $150 million, Battleship sank without a trace at the box office. It feels almost unfair to belabor the financial shortcomings of John Carter. The titular lead of this Andrew Stanton blockbuster was once synonymous with some of the most popular sci-fi novels on the planet. Now, thanks to this 2012 film's dismal box office run, John Carter is largely associated with one of the costliest misfires in the history of Hollywood. It's hard to imagine an outcome where John Carter managed to become profitable, though given its enormous $263.7 million budget, that was a price tag that actually made John Carter more expensive than 2012 films like The Avengers and The Dark Knight Rises.
I'll explain later.
Even if John Carter was likely doomed to be unprofitable, it was never expected to perform as badly as it did. The sheer magnitude of John Carter's box office shortcomings was made clear shortly into its theatrical run, once the Los Angeles Times reported the film would lose Disney $200 million. That was the kind of enormous loss that would stand out in all genres of cinema, let alone just among sci-fi films.